That's the world push. So there's this idea, when they go abroad, the idea is this, there's always been this idea that there's sort of an angst about back and forth. We want to be able to bring the oil right back home. We don't want to go through the market. Now, you can't always do that because sometimes you can't get it home, you can't refine it, but that's the goal, right? And one place, Chavez agrees very much because he wants to get away from the markets of El Imperio. I've heard him say it a number of times. The Chinese will take our oil directly home, even though it's 45 days, so we have to give them at a lower rate and so forth. Actually, PDVSA, I think by now, with all the loans they've given to China and some other countries to do things like that, because he also wants to get away from the market for a whole other reason. They only get paid for 60% of their oil or so. But Iran, it's also similarly want to bring the oil directly back home from Iran and from the Gulf. So this is part of that idea, making bilateral deals when you can. So what happens? And mainly this is OPEC, mainly this is IEA, OECD countries. So I just want to remind you, I'm going back. Here's the old system, here's the new system, right? The one global barrel I described in a cartoon fashion. Here's the old neo-colonial system. So what is it if China starts buying large amounts of oil with certain OPEC players? What happens to the system? Well, you end up with something like this. In principle, you end up with some kind of a hybrid system, a mixed system, right? Now, this was a neo-colonial system. So, I mean, in abstract terms, and it does have, the Chinese have been criticized that it can look like that, right? Or in other people's words, it can look like Ahmadinejad said, it's opposed to capitalism, or Chavez says it's socialist. But there's kind of, if this works, if they pull this off little by little, they're kind of building this mixed system. It's very problematic to see how far this is going to work, okay? Does that undermine the basic structure of the system at some point? Well, with the numbers I showed you before, not yet, clearly. All right? Well, from the point of view of Iran, why might you want to get into these deals, or from the point of view of Venezuela equally? There's this idea that if you stay away from the market, and also for China, what if there is a conflict, say, over Taiwan? You've got to buy oil from the market. If sanctions can be put right on Iran, or in principle on Venezuela, maybe if you're away from the market, getting your oil independently in bilateral ways, maybe you can get around that to some extent. You still have to get it across the seas, but which is another problem. But there's that possibility. So that's one urge here. That's in the direction of this independence. There's other idea that's not so relevant right now, but. So I would say, in answer to the president's question, it was interesting. Even though he asked, no one still would ask him a question about almost anything else. He was so preoccupied with details of centrifuges and so forth, okay? And I would say there's various reasons, obviously, but if sanctions were lifted, I would imagine that whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if in Washington in charge of foreign affairs, and you make a deal with Iran to lift sanctions, the investment will go, their production will take off. They'll take their rightful place in the world as one of the major, the second or third powerhouse oil producer. Forget nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons aren't the key. They can have a fairly substantial conventional force, like any country of that size would, and be able to project power in the Persian Gulf. So I would imagine at the bottom, if negotiations take place, negotiations are about what is the guarantee that even if Mr. Ahmadinejad would never, or the current supreme leader would have never considered doing such a thing, perhaps, I don't know, that some other Iranian leadership might in short order do, for example, what happened in Kuwait. And I would imagine that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of guarantees. And the real politic is, the U.S. is sort of the other tribe in the Middle East nowadays, and another player. So there's going to have to be some kind of, U.S. will not give up, under any circumstances, the protection. Under the picture I painted, there's political, economic reasons for it, of the market. On the other hand, Iran sees their right to project power. Whether you're the opposition or not, who's going to sign to limit the right to project power and to what extent? What are the guarantees? What's the way in which you could have confidence building? So why don't I think, let's have another nice slide, I don't think. Not really. Okay, the end. Yeah. So, In a broad sweep, that's my argument. Thank you.